Chapter 7:11. Lu Chen shot a glance at White Lotus and noticed that something was wrong with her. She exuded a gloomy aura that was entirely different from the beautiful young lady that he was familiar with. But this matter that might have surprised him and made him investigate immediately didn't seem to stir any waves in his heart now. The world in front of him, all the people here, and even the various messy things in the sky and on the ground, all seemed to be things that he had never heard of before, things that were very wrong. In this situation, Lu Chen witnessed White Lotus behaving abnormally, and he had a strange feeling that this was how things should be. Perhaps this world is about to go crazy or be destroyed, which is why it has become like this. At this critical juncture, this strange thought cropped up in Lu Chen's mind. He lowered his head to look at Atsu, thinking that only this black dog seemed to be the same as before. The dark dragon had arrived before Road and true Lord Tianlan. Its height was unimaginably massive, as though it occupied the entire underground cave. But of course that wasn't the case. It was just that the visual impact was too strong, leaving one with a sense of powerlessness and fear. However, this feeling couldn't be seen from true Lord Tianlan or Lu Chen. They didn't seem to have the emotions of ordinary humans. Even in the face of such a terrifying monster, their expressions remained unchanged and they looked at it calmly. The dark dragon didn't pay too much attention to the two ant-like humans. On the contrary, after it scanned the surroundings, it took a second glance at its feet. White Lotus walked to the side of this evil beast that seemed to have broken free from hell. On the surface of the darkness dragon's skin, there were countless ferocious and terrifying demonic ghosts attached to it. When the darkness dragon saw this beautiful girl, thousands of bloody mouths on his leg opened up and roared at the same time. It looked like they were salivating, and it made one's scalp go numb. However, Bai Lian turned a blind eye to them. She did not care about the ghosts at all. She stared straight at the huge dragon of darkness and suddenly raised her arms. She opened her hands and spoke. But what was strange was that even though her mouth moved, no sound came out. Even though she seemed to be chanting some kind of incantation or saying something, no one present could hear her voice. But the dark dragon reacted. It turned around, lowered its head, and gazed at the young lady. All of a sudden, it widened its mouth and spat out a stream of flames on White Lotus. Lu Chen trembled slightly. But shortly after, he realized that things weren't as he imagined. White Lotus didn't turn into ashes in the flames. Instead, she seemed to have opened her arms and embraced the sea of flames with all her might. The dragon flames were scorching and scorching, violently sweeping through the air. Only a sharp whistle could be heard as Bai Lian's clothes were instantly burned to ashes, scattering in all directions. However, in the blazing flames, the young lady's beautiful fair body was revealed. She was like a pure, flawless jade that rose slowly in the flames. She closed her eyes and was expressionless as though she had turned into an emotionless statue. She flew toward the dark dragon slowly while being surrounded by the flames. In the light of the fire, her body gradually emitted a gem-like luster. In front of her, on the chest of the darkness dragon, the terrifying armor formed by the horde of demonic ghosts suddenly squirmed. The demonic ghost in that area screamed shrilly. Then, a crack appeared. White Lotus was dragged over by the raging flames and fell into that crack. Countless demonic spirits snarled and the skin on the dark dragon's chest began to squirm like waves. Inside was a bottomless darkness, while on the outside were terrifying demonic spirits. They squeezed in from both sides and engulfed White Lotus's clean, flawless body like a tide. White Lotus didn't resist at all. In fact, she didn't even close her eyes. She calmly scanned the world and allowed the terrifying things to engulf her. Shortly after, only her face was exposed while the rest of her body was devoured by the dark dragon's body. Around her face, there were sinister and terrifying demonic spirits. A few demonic ghosts that were close to her even opened their mouths at her. Some roared, some bared their sharp teeth, and some stuck out their scarlet tongues, seemingly with a bit of strange curiosity, and licked her face. White Lotus didn't respond. She stared blankly ahead. Unsure if it was an illusion, Lu Chen felt that she seemed to be looking at him. Atsu growled in a low voice. However, its voice was deep and mixed. For a moment, Lu Chen couldn't tell if it was angry, or any other emotions. He stroked Atsu's head and comforted it. Soon, Atsu calmed down. Then, out of the corner of Lu Chen's eye, he saw a ray of golden light shining out from the ground. That ray of golden light wasn't eye-catching, especially under the gigantic body of the demonic spirit. Moreover, There were also the various light pillars from the ritual that shielded them. The ray of light emitted from the Kunlun seal seemed more like a feeble ray of light that was meaningless. The dark dragon didn't notice this tiny change at all. After surprisingly absorbing White Lotus into its body, it lifted its head and let out another roar at the sky. It was apparent that in this world, the dark dragon harbored greater hostility toward the gigantic eye in the sky. It was an indescribable feeling. Lu Chen pondered for a moment and could only say that it was probably like a wild beast that was guarding its territory, which was why it flew into a rage after witnessing its territory being invaded. The dark dragon's brutality and hostility were so obvious that it probably didn't care about any enemies in this world. After repeated provocations, the gigantic eye in the sky finally couldn't hold it in any longer and reacted even more violently. All of a sudden, the enormous, dark vortex spun violently. Lightning bolts filled the entire sky in an instant. The blood moon trembled abruptly and swayed unsteadily. It seemed like it was about to be devoured by the vortex in the violent gales and was slowly being pulled into the depths of the vortex. The dark dragon let out a long roar that reverberated in all directions. As though it was ruthlessly stimulated, it became increasingly violent. It was also at this moment that Lu Chen, who was watching the two terrifying beings in outer space, suddenly heard perfected Lord Tianlan's voice. He laughed and said, "See, I wasn't wrong, right? These two are really useless. They look powerful, but aren't they still fighting on their own?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said and nodded. "It's almost time." Chapter 7:12. Apart from perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen, no one else noticed the inconspicuous golden light that shot out from the ground, and neither of them said a word about it. Amidst the hustle and bustle, the ray of golden light was mixed in with other rays of light, swept across the enormous dark dragon's body, and landed in an inconspicuous corner of the dragon's lower abdomen. There was no pain, no itch, and no change. Lu Chen waited for a while, but the hidden dark dragon didn't appear as he imagined. Maybe I guessed wrongly? Lu Chen was a little puzzled. However, an even more intense battle was taking place in the sky above his head, so his attention was quickly drawn over. The blood moon, which was constantly being pulled over by the powerful force contained in the vortex where the giant eye was, seemed to be trembling and a little unstable. The dark dragon obviously attached great importance to this blood moon. It became so furious that it even ignored the few insignificant humans around it. It raised its head high and roared at the sky. Then, it suddenly turned around and spat a ball of flames at the light pillars that trapped the three perfected lords. After being sprayed by this powerful dragon flame, the three pillars of light suddenly trembled and became unstable. The three incarnation true monarchs that were originally imprisoned in the air suddenly fell to the ground. Although they were quickly enveloped by the pillars of light again, at that moment, there was still an aura that came out. Lu Chen could sense that it was a very, very powerful aura that was even more terrifying than all the perfected lords that he had met before. Of course, he knew what the reason was. His expression changed slightly, and he turned to look at perfected Lord Tianlan. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression also turned a little ugly at this moment. It seemed that he was also caught off guard by this accident. Perhaps it was only at this moment that Lu Chen truly saw the first tiny flaw in this damned Baldy's meticulous plan. In fact, this wasn't even a mistake, but just an accident. Perhaps no one was perfect, not to mention that perfected Lord Tianlan's target was an unimaginably terrifying existence that was far beyond anyone's imagination. It was perfectly normal for accidents to happen. But even though the accident happened, it was fortunate that it didn't go out of control. The gigantic eye represented unparalleled power, and it seemed to be truly enraged by the dark dragon's provocation. In the depths of the dark vortex in the sky, a thunderous sound suddenly came. It was as if a terrifying existence had lost its patience and could no longer endure it. It began to speed up its pace. The roars of dragons and tigers resounded through the air. The huge whirlpool spun crazily, and in the depths of the darkness, a ray of light flashed and a huge claw stretched out. As the giant claw reached out from the void, countless lightning bolts roared and flashed at the edge of the giant claw, as if they had gone mad and attacked the giant claw. Perhaps the world did not allow such a giant claw to come to this world, so some kind of power was trying its best to stop and attack it. The gigantic eye in the sky moved its pupils as though it was in pain. But its greater greed and desire overcame everything. It withstood the lightning attack. In the sea of lightning that was enough to turn thousands of people into ashes, the huge claw was mostly charred and yet it still stretched out. The sea of clouds rolled and the huge claw pierced through the layers of clouds. In an instant, the charred claw dispersed with the wind and all the wounds healed automatically. The world wailed and trembled in submission. The wind sounded like it was weeping. The huge claw changed direction and grabbed at the blood moon. The darkness dragon suddenly roared at the sky. As though it had sensed something, the blood moon's brilliance intensified. Then, in the huge immortal city on the ground, every place that was illuminated by the blood moon's brilliance, every street, every corner, every mountain range, every hall, was suddenly enveloped by the blood-red light. Countless suppressed sounds were suppressed before they could spread out. The hoarse cries of pain seemed so small and weak in this world that they couldn't even be sensed. Clusters of blood-red essence burst out from countless corners, turned into green smoke, and slowly rose into the air, converging towards the blood-red moon. In the underground cave, perfected Lord Tianlan saw this scene, and so did Lu Chen. Blood suddenly drained from Lu Chen's face. He wasn't an idiot, and he wasn't a completely emotionless person with a heart of stone. He still breathed, he still had feelings, he still felt like a human. His eyes seemed to turn red as he stared at the countless floating blood-colored essences in the air. At that moment, there was a roar in his heart, telling him that perhaps he should do something. However, another voice was still mocking him, telling him that he was so weak that he couldn't do anything at all. He turned his head with some difficulty and glanced at perfected Lord Tianlan. He saw that burly figure standing there with his hands behind his back, looking up at the sky expressionlessly. Lu Chen was stunned for a while before he retracted his gaze and lowered his head. The familiar feeling that made him deeply uneasy surfaced in his heart again. Everything seemed to have returned to that desolate valley many years ago. He was once again facing the same situation, but this time, would his choice be different? Lu Chen didn't know. Boom! The giant claw in the void suddenly grabbed the blood moon, and a ghastly red light shot out from its fingers and palm, like blood that kept flowing. All the blood-colored essence between heaven and earth suddenly seemed to be stimulated by something. It surged upwards frantically, converging into a red river and surging into the blood moon. The red light shone brightly, and the huge claw was pushed away bit by bit. The huge eye in the sky seemed to be surprised for the first time and stared at the blood moon. On the ground, the dark dragon was immensely pleased. It roared at the sky again, then turned around and walked towards the three light pillars. It seemed like it wanted to directly intercept the three people. At that moment, the huge eye in the sky suddenly turned and stared at the dark dragon. Endless darkness flickered in its eyes. The dark dragon seemed to sense some danger and looked up. However, it seemed to be looking in the wrong direction. A golden light shot at its lower abdomen. At that moment, a dragon's roar suddenly pierced through heaven and earth. The golden light exploded, and the Kunlun seal flew up from the ground. Wherever it landed, the stone slabs suddenly shattered. A huge figure leaped out and directly pounced on the dark dragon's lower abdomen. Then it bit down heavily. It was that black dragon. The black dragon that had stayed in the forbidden land among the clouds for countless years, waiting bitterly for its mission. It suddenly charged forward, seemingly not caring about its own body at all. It even seemed like it was going to perish together with its opponent. Between heaven and earth, time stood still. At that moment, only a voice echoed, "Die, little brother!" Chapter 7:13. The Dragon Clan was an extremely powerful clan that had once existed in the divine Central Continent. However, in the distant primeval age, these unbelievably powerful divine beasts had already gone extinct. Now, it had been countless years since they had appeared in the world. After the humans appeared and ruled the divine Central Continent, for a very, very long time, the dragon race only existed in the records of myths and legends. This was actually a paradox to a certain extent because it was common knowledge that humans only appeared long after the dragon race had gone extinct, at least according to historical records. In that case, why did the dragon race appear in the history of the human race? Or could it be that the dragon race, a divine beast race, was actually just a figment of the imagination of the humans? Humans were animals that loved to imagine and had unlimited imagination. If that was the case, it wouldn't be too strange. However, many years ago there was a period of time about 300 to 500 years ago, people successively discovered some unimaginably huge skeletons in some remote and desolate places, such as mountains, valleys, seas, lakes, and swamps. In the end, people determined that these skeletons belonged to the ancient legendary dragon clan. However, no one would have thought that there were still remnants of the dragon race in this world, and not just one but two. What was even more surprising was that these two giant dragons seemed to be brothers. Although their appearances were completely different, especially the darkness dragon that walked out of the door of darkness. It was possessed by thousands of demonic ghosts and no longer had the aura of the dragon race. Instead, it looked more like an evil spirit that walked out from the depths of hell. At that moment, Lu Chen suddenly recalled a nightmare he had on a certain night a long time ago. In the dream, he seemed to have passed through the sea of stars, passed through countless voids, and saw the apocalyptic scene of the heavens collapsing and the earth splitting. Countless dark demonic ghosts flew out from the ground, tormenting the world and plunging the living into misery and suffering. Above the vault of heaven, a giant dragon soared and danced, spewing dragon flames from its mouth as it fought against the endless demonic ghosts by itself. That scene only lasted for a moment and disappeared in the blink of an eye, but Lu Chen remembered it because that scene was really shocking. At this moment, Lu Chen suddenly remembered this from his long-buried memories. He subconsciously turned his head to look around, and then looked up at the sky. He suddenly realized that the scene in front of him was very similar to the scene in his dream, except that there was an additional giant eye in the sky. The enormous dragon pounced on the dark dragon. It emerged from the void, broke free from the inconspicuous Kunlun seal, landed on the ground, pounced on the dark dragon, and chomped down. Shrill howls shook the heavens and earth. Black blood splattered everywhere, accompanied by the horrified screams of countless demonic ghosts. A strange, ear-piercing sound that made one's scalp tingle sounded. The dark dragon tore a huge wound on the dark dragon's lower abdomen. At the same time, at least hundreds of demonic ghosts were turned into ashes by that terrifying attack, scattering in all directions. The seemingly indestructible demonic ghost armor was as fragile as a piece of paper in the face of the all-out sneak attack of this ancient mythical beast. The dark dragon collapsed to the ground. It was apparent that this sudden attack had severely injured it. However, a powerful creature that walked out of the door of darkness wouldn't die so easily. Even though its body was almost broken into two, the demonic ghosts on its body roared at the sky almost at the same time it was injured. The dark aura surged and gushed toward the wound desperately, recovering and mending it. The terrifying, malevolent dragon head turned around and let out a deafening roar. It was as though there were two ghastly flames burning in its bone-deep hatred. Like a bolt of lightning, it bit the dark dragon's neck. Bam! In a loud bang, one of the dark dragon's enormous claws struck the dark dragon's head. In an instant, a bloody storm ensued. At the same time, blood gushed out from the dark dragon's neck and tore open a huge wound. At the same time, when the dragon blood spurted out, the countless demonic creatures on the dark dragon's body howled and swarmed over in an instant. They pounced on the dark dragon's wound, biting and sucking the dragon blood frantically. The dark dragon howled in pain and slapped the dark dragon's head away. Then, the two gigantic beasts started fighting again. The two gigantic beasts with terrifying strength didn't use any fancy skills at all. They engaged in a simple melee as though all the fancy skills in the world weren't worth mentioning in their eyes. However, the dark dragon was gradually suppressed, especially when the wound on its neck showed signs of going out of control under the attacks of the countless demonic ghosts. Under such a fierce battle, the surrounding area couldn't withstand the attacks of the gigantic beasts at all and was instantly torn apart. Lu Chen grabbed Atsu and drifted backward. However, he suddenly realized that perfected Lord Tianlan was still standing on the spot and didn't retreat like him. The damn Baldy looked up at the sky and seemed to be mumbling something. Lu Chen's heart skipped a beat. He lifted his head and saw that the blood moon in the sky had disappeared into the huge dark vortex at some point in time. Heaven and earth suddenly darkened. All the moonlight vanished at that moment, even though the moonlight was blood red in color. The gigantic eye suddenly enlarged, as though it had suddenly tasted something delicious and satisfied its yearning for countless years. Then, it was followed by an even more uncontrollable desire. The gigantic claw in the sky didn't stop or retract. It made a turn in the air and flew down, grabbing at the dark dragon's head. At that moment, the dark dragon was attacked from both sides. It suddenly fell from its invincible state into a desperate situation. The dark dragon roared and its huge body suddenly rose. The sneak attack of the dark dragon that trapped it seemed to be inferior to it in terms of strength. However, at this critical moment, the dark dragon hugged the dark dragon and forcefully dragged it to the ground. The gigantic claw in the sky with a destructive aura suddenly came crashing down and grabbed the dark dragon's head. Almost at the same time, The 3 light pillars that trapped the 3 divine transformation stage perfected lords suddenly enlarged by several times. Blood-curdling screams could be heard. The 3 figures that were submerged in the light swayed violently before exploding and disappearing. The corner of Lu Chen's eyes twitched. Then, he suddenly stopped looking at the intense battle that could almost destroy the earth. Instead, he looked at the exceptionally quiet perfected Lord Tianlan. Perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand at him. The glowing and lively branch of the Tree of God slowly flew back to his hand. He held the branch and turned back to smile at Lu Chen. The smile was very gentle, but Lu Chen felt a chill in his heart. He felt that it was the most terrifying face he had ever seen in his life. Chapter 7:14. Perfected Lord Tianlan grabbed the branch of the Tree of God in his hand and turned it upside down. Like holding a pen with one hand, he casually drew something in front of him. Previously, in the brief but intense battle with the 2 supremes, Tai Hu and Guangbo, he had used this branch to force Tai Hu to retreat. At that time, the branch of the Tree of God in his hand was like a strange sharp blade that directly cut through the void. But this time it was different. What was left in front of him was a green trace full of vitality, like a green line. The line was straight from top to bottom, like a straight tree trunk. It was condensed in the air without dispersing, emitting a green light, which was very beautiful. Perfected Lord Tianlan did not look back, but spoke to himself. There was no one else around except for Lu Chen. Obviously, these words were for him, or in fact, Tianlan did not deliberately want to tell Lu Chen anything. It was just that after doing so many things, he still needed someone to listen to him. At least, he wanted someone in this world to understand what a great thing he had done. The dragon tribe is the stupidest race in the world. Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, they used to be very powerful, but then they killed each other. Among them, the weaker faction was not reconciled, so they racked their brains to come up with something similar to the god-vanquishing spell, and then they summoned these demonic ghosts. He looked at the 2 dragons who were fighting fiercely and the giant claw descending from the sky, and revealed a contemptuous and sarcastic smile, saying, "Don't you find it very familiar? It's almost exactly the same as what the useless devil cult did." The result was that the dragon tribe was divided into 2 factions. One faction adhered to the tradition, while the other degenerated and merged with the demonic ghosts. In the end, both sides perished together, leaving only the 2 most powerful black dragons. Well, they are brothers. Lu Chen took a deep breath and looked into the distance. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "Yes, it's these 2 big bugs." Perfected Lord Tianlan held the branch and drew in front of him. Some green lines began to appear in the air, and some strange outlines and strange symbols began to appear. Of course, all of them were green and brimming with vitality. Logically speaking, they were causing quite a commotion here. But the giant dragon and the giant eye in the sky were at a critical juncture and couldn't be bothered to pay attention to what was happening here. That's why I said that since ancient times, there have actually been countless ghosts coveting our world. However, there's always been a force restraining them, preventing them from truly devouring this place. It's even to the extent that they can't enter our world. Unless... He raised his head to look at the sky, smiled and said, "Unless someone deliberately opened the passage to let these things in." People are really stupid, aren't they? Perfected Lord Tianlan sighed with a hint of pity and mockery on his face. That's why all the living beings in the world are so busy. How laughable are they in the eyes of others? He thought that happiness was in his grasp, but he didn't know that everything would turn to dust in the blink of an eye. Lu Chen stared at the drawing in front of him. He felt his eyebrows twitch and his heart beat extremely fast. Even his voice was strangely hoarse. "Then what do you plan to do?" Perfected Lord Tianlan drew with the branch again, then looked at the green image in front of him with satisfaction. Even his face seemed to be reflected green. "If I don't do anything, I'll just be struggling at death's door. One day, the world of the divine central continent will become the prey of others. When that time comes, there will be no hope of recovery. What I have to do is put myself on the edge of death and come back to life." Lu Chen let out a long sigh. "Put myself on the edge of death?" Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him with an excited and smug expression. "That's a good idea, isn't it?" "I don't understand," Lu Chen said, taking a step forward. Atu, who was standing beside him, suddenly raised his head and looked at Lu Chen. Although he didn't move, the fur around Atu's neck suddenly stood on end, as if an invisible needle had suddenly pricked him, causing him to feel a sense of fear. Perfected Lord Tianlan's gaze fell on the green image in front of him. As he waved it, it was becoming more and more perfect, gradually revealing its true appearance. It really looked like, a big tree. The tree of God is the source of all the worlds in the universe. It's said that countless worlds are born on the tree of God, the source of all living beings' vitality. The tree of God feeds on extraterrestrial monsters. I've thought about it a long time ago. I'll provoke these monsters to fight. At most, I'll sacrifice the flesh and blood essence of this generation to attract the tree of God. When the monsters are destroyed and the tree of God leaves, it will leave behind endless vitality. Only then can our divine central continent be reborn. Lu Chen looked at him, muttering to himself as if he had gone mad. The corner of his mouth twitched. After a long silence he suddenly said, "I don't remember you being like this before." Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed and said, "That's because I didn't know much at that time. Now that I know more, my eyes have naturally changed." Lu Chen closed his eyes. After a while, he nodded and said, "All right, but how did the tree of God come about?" Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly snorted and pointed the branch of the tree of God forward, right at the center of the image. In an instant, a green light shone brightly, and a towering green tree vaguely appeared in the green light. Countless branches blotted out the sky and danced in the air, as if sweeping the entire world. He laughed, pointed in that direction and shouted, "Isn't that it?" As he spoke, a thunderclap suddenly exploded in midair. The green light and shadow trembled violently. Green light shot out in all directions, and the giant tree swayed and rippled. A mysterious and powerful force floated over from the distant void, as if it was testing something. Lu Chen suddenly snorted and pressed his hand to his chest, his face pale. At that moment, he felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart, and the pain was unbearable. Even with his strong will, he almost fainted in that instant. Lu Chen forcibly endured it, but he knew in his heart that the thing he worried about the most was probably about to happen. He lowered his head and looked at his chest, his expression miserable. He felt a sense of helplessness welling up in his heart. But at that moment, his vision suddenly blurred, and he seemed to suddenly see the inside of that mysterious tree hole. The familiar scene was the same as before, but the two doors on the tree wall seemed to have changed. The door of the tree seemed to have become much larger, and even seemed to have doubled in size. Then, a strange sound suddenly came from the door that he had gone through the last time. Pa 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 pa. It was as if someone was knocking on the door outside, wanting to enter. Chapter 7:15. Lu Chen had never, not even once, been able to see the situation inside the ancient tree hole in the seed of the god tree without entering it himself. This kind of situation had never happened before, not even in his dreams. However, on this day, when he lowered his head to look at his chest, he suddenly realized that the flesh on his chest seemed to have turned illusory. His gaze passed through his flesh and bones and saw the sacred tree seed that was buried deep in his heart. The sacred tree seed still looked the same as when he saw it in the barren valley many years ago. The only difference was that there were more than 10 silk-like tentacles of different lengths and thicknesses on its surface. They were inserted or attached to the inner wall of Lu Chen's heart, firmly fixed in the atrium. Occasionally, he could even see a faint red flash past those tentacles, as if they were sucking blood from the heart into the seed. The appearance of these seeds only flashed past his eyes for a moment. Then, Lu Chen's gaze penetrated through them and saw the inside of the seed, which was the strange and peculiar alternate dimension and the ancient tree hole. The situation in the tree hole did not change as the world outside turned upside down. At least, Lu Chen did not see any obvious changes in the places that he could see. However, the sound that echoed in his ears at this moment was not an illusion. Before he could even wonder why there was such a strange and fantastical scene in front of him, his attention was once again attracted by the knocking sound. There was a person knocking on the door. That door was the door that he had opened in the ancient tree hole, the door that led to the endless strange void. At that moment, Lu Chen stared at the door and felt that his heart seemed to have suddenly stopped beating. Pa 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 pa. The knocking sound did not stop and was still echoing. The person outside the door seemed to be extraordinarily patient as he waited quietly and called out. Why would the door suddenly make a sound? What exactly was outside the door? Lu Chen raised his head with some difficulty, only to find that perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be fully focused on his own magic and did not notice his abnormality. Lu Chen had been behind that door once, and that experience was the most terrifying one in his life. He did not want to experience it again, but no matter what, he remembered what he had seen and heard that time firmly in his mind. Some things could not be forgotten even if he wanted to. He remembered very clearly what he had seen. That time, he had seen an extremely huge shadow in the endless dark void, and a part of it had turned into a tree branch and arrived in front of him. Although nobody explained and there were no records, Lu Chen knew that what he had seen that time was the Tree of God. He knew very well that the Tree of God had come to find the seed in his body. However, for some reason, the Tree of God had still left in the end and nothing had changed. But now, the situation seemed to be different. Even though he was in an inexplicable and even bizarre state, Lu Chen had a feeling that he could still open that door as long as he wanted to, just like how he was in the past. Open the door and let the person behind the door, or something, come in? No. Lu Chen did not want to do that at all. The knocking sound at this time was definitely not a coincidence or without reason. There must be a reason. As for the reason, it was almost self-evident. He raised his head and looked in the direction of perfected Lord Tianlan. He saw that the green light in front of him was boundless and full of vitality. The mirage of the divine tree was shaking violently. The surrounding air was trembling and ripples spread out. An inexplicable aura began to seep out as if something was about to descend. The strange situation here, especially the sudden appearance of this powerful aura, finally attracted the attention of the giant dragon and the giant eye in the sky who were fighting fiercely. Clearly, they had smelled some kind of danger signal and suddenly turned their heads to look at perfected Lord Tianlan. Lu Chen was still like a forgotten character, standing alone at the side. However, he could still clearly hear the sound coming from the depths of his heart. It did not stop and continued. Moreover, he did not know when it started, but the knocking sound gradually became louder. Pa! 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 From the original short and gentle sound, it gradually became heavy and powerful. The door began to shake. Every time there was a knock, the door would shake violently once, and even Lu Chen's body would shake along with it. The door banged and shook. It looked like it was about to be knocked open. He clutched his chest heavily with his hand, his face deathly pale. Lu Chen did not know what the Tree of God's illusion in front of perfected Lord Tianlan would bring, but a voice kept echoing in his mind, telling him that the most dangerous thing was not there, but the door in his heart. What was behind that door was the most terrifying, the most frightening. He clenched his teeth and suddenly snorted, as if he felt some kind of extreme pain at that moment. However, at the same time, a dark flame suddenly flashed at the edge of his palm. Then, his palm turned illusory and passed through his chest, mysteriously entering the mysterious ancient tree hole. Lu Chen didn't even have time to carefully think about what was going on. He subconsciously used his hand to hold the door that was on the verge of collapsing. The trembling door was supported by his palm and instantly stabilized. Then, it stood upright in the distance in a domineering manner. The thing outside the door also seemed to feel something and instantly became furious. The sound of knocking against the door suddenly became much louder, and the frequency was also doubled. Only banging sounds could be heard in an instant. Lu Chen's face first turned pale, then red, and then paled again. His body seemed to be suffering from some kind of serious illness, and a mass of blood surged up and then disappeared. However, no matter what, his hand was still firmly pressed against the door. After an unknown period of time, perhaps a very long period of time, or perhaps just a short moment, the thing behind the door seemed to understand something. It suddenly became still and silent. Lu Chen still did not dare to believe it, but after careful observation, he found that the danger seemed to have passed for the time being. However, at the same time, he suddenly heard perfected Lord Tianlan let out a furious roar of surprise and anger. He suddenly looked up and found that a large expanse of darkness had already covered the sky above his head, and perfected Lord Tianlan had disappeared at some point in time. The originally radiant illusion of the Tree of God in mid-air was grabbed by two giant dragons at the same time. At the same time, the giant claw also grabbed the middle section of the Tree of God. Then, in an instant, these three terrifying forces exploded at the same time. The illusion of the Tree of God shattered with a loud bang, and the green light suddenly flourished. Then, like a sky full of stars, they fell down together. Lu Chen's heart was in so much pain that he wanted to faint, but he just couldn't really collapse. Because at this moment, just when he thought that everything was doomed, he suddenly heard a voice from somewhere. No, it seemed to be coming from behind him. No, it seemed to be in his heart. Somewhere, there was the sound of the door opening. Lu Chen's body trembled violently. Then, he slowly lowered his head and stared at his own chest. The door was still fastened against him, securely and solidly shut. But on the other side, there was another door. The second door, which had never been opened, which had never attracted attention, suddenly, slowly, opened. Chapter 7:16. At that moment, Lu Chen felt that all the blood in his body seemed to have frozen. He could neither breathe nor move. He subconsciously wanted to do something, such as trying to close the door, block the door, or do something else to stop what might happen next. However, he soon realized that he could not do anything. After the door opened, before he could clearly see the situation outside, the door suddenly let out a low muffled sound, and then the whole thing fell down. With a paw sound, it fell heavily on the ground. There was no longer any obstruction in front of the door. The door was wide open. This sudden change happened in the blink of an eye. Before Lu Chen could even react, the door was placed directly in front of him. Then, he saw that outside the second door, he could not see far away because there was only darkness. After a moment of silence in the darkness, a familiar branch slowly stretched in from outside the door. The ancient tree hole suddenly trembled, and Lu Chen's face suddenly turned pale. It was as if his heart had suddenly contracted and was in extreme pain. The branch looked like a snake that began to climb from the tree wall and slowly slithered around. However, wherever it passed, it seemed to be in harmony with the surrounding environment and did not cause any damage. Even the tree hole did not react to it. It seemed that they were originally born from the same root. In fact, it was probably the case. Not long after, the branches of the tree of God had climbed all over the ancient tree hole. However, just like when Lu Chen was here in the past, there was actually no other way out except for this small space. It seemed that the branches of the tree of God were trapped here. However, at this moment, the branches of the tree of God suddenly raised their heads. The branches and leaves at the front seemed to have eyes and suddenly lifted up, as if they were staring at someone in the void. Lu Chen felt as if his heart had been hammered. His body shook and then he could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. He fell to the ground. Supreme Lord Tianlan was nowhere to be seen. The two giant dragons and the giant claw were fighting again and did not notice the ant-like Lu Chen at all. Around him, there was only the frightened and helpless Atsu. Atu pushed his head against Lu Chen's body with all his might, but Lu Chen did not react at all. Blood continued to flow from the corner of his mouth, and he clutched his chest tightly with his hands. He looked completely unharmed, but he felt as if his life was rapidly slipping away. Atsu was extremely anxious and barked. Suddenly, it raised its front feet and pressed on Lu Chen's chest, as if it could feel that something bad was happening in Lu Chen's body. As the only animal in the world who had been to the ancient tree hole with Lu Chen, Atsu almost instinctively thought of that place. But it was useless. It did not dare to pry open Lu Chen's chest to do anything. However, just as it anxiously pressed down, Lu Chen suddenly let out a low groan, actually waking up from that painful and dizzy state. He suddenly sat up and covered his chest with his hands. Then, he looked around and saw that in the shadow that only he could see, the figure of the seed had appeared again. The difference was that the seed's whole body suddenly ignited with a black flame. The dozen tentacles that stretched out around it and were firmly in contact with Lu Chen's heart lit up at the same time. Then, a force wrapped around Lu Chen's heart from the inside out. This seed of the sacred tree had actually blocked the attack of the sacred tree branch at the critical moment and protected Lu Chen. At that moment, Lu Chen clearly felt that the seed seemed to have really merged with his heart. Although this situation was extremely strange and indescribable, it was the truth. Even he himself felt puzzled. He could not believe that the seed of the sacred tree, which had the same root and origin, would actually go against the sacred tree branch for him? Although the situation was extremely strange, after the seed of the sacred tree attacked, Lu Chen quickly regained control of his body. When he looked down, he could still see that the ancient tree hole in his body had been occupied by the sacred tree branch. Moreover, the sacred tree branch was wandering around, obviously crazily looking for an exit, preparing to find a door in his body to come to this world. At this moment, he was suddenly shocked. Almost as if there was a flash of inspiration in his mind, he thought of something. The door. Yes, it turned out that he was the real door. The door in the ancient tree hole was the passage that the sacred tree had opened to return to this world. However, for some reason, this colossus seemed to be unable to find the entrance to the divine central continent. Therefore, by a freak combination of factors, it had merged with his body through the seed of the sacred tree. His body had actually become the entrance that the sacred tree used to enter this world, the final door. It was no wonder that he could not die. If he died, the seed that had merged with his heart would very likely be seriously injured, and the sacred tree might not be able to enter this world. Lu Chen felt a little bitter in his mouth. He had never expected that, while he had been watching coldly from the sidelines as Supreme Lord Tianlan stirred up the wind and summoned the rain. He had been struggling in his heart, wondering if what he was doing was right or wrong, and whether he should help or oppose him. In the blink of an eye, the key to the matter had inexplicably fallen on him. He stared at his chest, at the branch that was anxiously crawling away from the ancient tree hole, and then subconsciously looked up at the two dragons that were fighting fiercely against each other. They were covered in wounds but were still huge. It seemed like the difference between the two sides was extremely huge. No matter what, this divine tree seemed to be unable to pose a threat to them. However, when Supreme Lord Tianlan drew the phantom image of the sacred tree, the two dragons and the giant eye in the sky gave up fighting at the same time and rushed over to strangle the phantom image, choking off all possible entrances that the sacred tree could use to enter this world. It seemed that these colossus beasts were very, very afraid of the sacred tree. After the earth-shattering commotion, the situation of the fierce battle gradually became clear. The insufferably arrogant dark dragon, who had just made his appearance in an awe-inspiring manner, was being attacked from both sides by two powerful enemies. Moreover, he had suffered a sneak attack and was now gradually unable to hold on. Its body began to show signs of collapsing. Even though countless demonic ghosts howled miserably, its flesh and blood were torn apart, and black mist scattered everywhere. Its skeleton collapsed, and it seemed to have shrunk in size. It was a particularly wretched sight. On the other hand, for some reason, the area on his chest was relatively intact. White Lotus's beautiful face was still embedded there with her eyes shut as though oblivious to the movements in the outside world. Everything seemed to be coming to an end. The dark dragon was knocked to the ground. He let out a shrill scream and forced back the two powerful enemies like a madman. Then, he crawled toward the dark portal with all his might. Chapter 717. Lu Chen was at a loss. Things seemed to have gotten out of his control. No, he had never controlled anything. After setting up this trap, the one who attracted powerful enemies that were strong enough to destroy the human race had always been perfected Lord Tianlan. But now, that damn Baldy was gone. That guy sure runs fast. Lu Chen felt that his brain wasn't enough. Even someone as calm as him couldn't face the complicated situation in front of him calmly. The beasts were fighting to the death while the more powerful sacred tree hidden in the dark was searching for the entrance to enter this world. Lu Chen could sense that the entrance should be on his body. Besides, the sacred tree wouldn't be unable to find it. If it really came to that, no one in the world could save him. This was probably the first time in his life that he felt completely powerless. Facing the mysterious sacred tree hidden in his heart, he didn't even know how to resist. Could it be that it wants to kill me first? But who could be sure that the sacred tree couldn't come out of the corpse? Lu Chen suddenly felt someone pulling him. He turned around, only to see Atsu biting his sleeve and pulling it backward. It seemed to be trying to get Lu Chen to leave this place with it. Lu Chen's heart skipped a beat. He nodded and followed Atsu to the side. It was also at this time that he took a look at his surroundings. Only then did he realize that the several earth-shattering battles that had taken place here were actually blocked by the invisible circle of light, and none of the shockwaves reached the outside. This ritual circle, or to be more precise, the demon sex vanquish incantation circle, indeed had mysterious powers. But Lu Chen couldn't be bothered to think about it now. He followed Atsu out. Along the way, the beasts that were fighting fiercely didn't look at him at all, as though they didn't care about him at all. As he was about to run out of the vanquish incantation circle, Lu Chen couldn't help but look back. The dark dragon had finally reached the point where it couldn't resist anymore. After letting out a desperate howl, it collapsed to the ground a few dozen feet away from the door of darkness. The skeleton of the dark dragon crumbled. Countless demonic ghosts fluttered their wings and soared into the sky. Their screams were deafening. After a few moments, all the demonic ghosts turned around and pounced on the dark dragon. Then, a series of bone-chilling gnawing sounds filled the air. These ghosts from the depths of the dark hell crazily devoured the giant dragon, constantly nibbling away at its body. The dragon collapsed and died silently. No one knew what kind of glorious past it had in ancient times. The final glory of the dragon race also came to an end on this day. The black dragon that was its blood brother took a few steps back in exhaustion. Its eyes revealed a look of relief and relief. It was as if the heavy burden that had been weighing on its heart and shoulders for countless years had finally been lifted off its shoulders. But at that moment, the dark dragon's body suddenly trembled and it let out a painful roar. A giant claw silently arrived behind it, and then directly pierced into its back, right at its most fatal spot, the dragon's heart. Under this strike, the already severely injured and exhausted dark dragon's chest exploded in an instant. Countless streams of dragon blood gushed out, mixed with the shattered flesh and blood of the dark dragon's heart. It could no longer recover completely. The dark dragon roared hoarsely and then collapsed like a small mountain. In the middle of it, it seemed to take one last look at the sky and found that the vortex in the sky had begun to spin rapidly again. As the final victor of this fierce battle, the one in the sky seemed to be happy that all the obstacles had been swept away. Then, the wind and clouds surged, and the dark vortex rapidly expanded, soon occupying the entire sky. In the deepest part of the darkness, an incomparably huge body began to faintly appear and approach this world. A powerful aura reverberated in the sky, looking down and about to descend here. From life to death, from death to life, a reincarnation, a cycle. What should come would come, but it was a few decades late. Lu Chen and Atsu successfully ran out of the god subjugation spell formation, and they did not encounter any obstacles or dangers along the way. This surprised Lu Chen a little, but then he thought about the people who were responsible for this spell formation. Lord Tianlan was nowhere to be found, and Lord Guyu had already died in the light of the giant eye in the sky. It was probably because this spell formation was no longer controlled by anyone. For some reason, after leaving the god subjugation spell formation, Lu Chen suddenly felt a lot more clear-headed, and his entire mind instantly became clear. He immediately stopped in his tracks. Atsu was a little puzzled, and it barked at him anxiously and was obviously a little dissatisfied. It seemed to be saying that they should not think so much now, and that it was more important for the two of them to escape. There were too many ridiculously powerful guys here, and they could not be stopped by humans. In short, they should escape first. Lu Chen patted Atsu's head with his hand, comforting it and calming this anxious black dog down. He then looked around, and after a while, his expression suddenly changed slightly. When he ran out, all his thoughts were on the battle of the giant beasts behind him, and he did not notice the outside world, but at this moment, he smelled an incomparably strong smell of blood. The smell of blood seemed to have gathered into a sea of blood, and he was at the bottom of the deep sea, almost unable to breathe. His body trembled slightly, and his eyes flashed slightly. Suddenly, he dragged Atsu and flew into the sky. In the middle of this, he suddenly noticed something again. He glanced at the sky, and the round blood moon had disappeared. An even more powerful and terrifying aura was gathering in the vortex high up in the sky, and a huge figure was slowly approaching this world. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched slightly, and then he turned and flew in the direction of Mount Celestial Dragon. Along the way, he flew over the streets and cities, and saw clouds of blood tumbling erratically. Under the blood-red blood, there were countless corpses lying in the corners and on the streets. Almost all of the corpses had undergone strange changes, and they looked neither human nor ghost. Some even showed signs of beastification, with sharp teeth, tails, hair, and so on. But now, everything had returned to the original point, and all the creatures were dead. The entire huge immortal city had become a dead city, and the tumbling blood-red clouds were like a curse, gathering countless terrifying spirits here. Lu Chen's face turned pale, and very soon, he no longer looked at these tragic scenes, and sped up to the top of the mountain. His goal was very clear, and his speed was very fast. In the shortest time, he reached the territory of Fuyunji on the mountain, and the towering Kunlun temple was in sight. Then he saw that the large open space under his feet had been filled with layers of blood and corpses, and countless corpses were piled up like a mountain. His body swayed a little. He didn't know if it was because he was too disgusted, or if it was because his heart was too shocked, but he managed to endure it. In the end, he flew over and stopped in front of the Kunlun temple. Chapter 7:18. Along the way, the place with the most corpses was in front of the main hall of Fuyunji. There were layers upon layers of corpses, and blood flowed like a river. It was a tragic sight. Even Lu Chen, who had always been hard-hearted, and Atsu, who did not care about anything, did not want to stay there any longer and examine it carefully. Compared to the tragic situation at the main hall of Fuyunji, Kunlun was surprisingly peaceful. The buildings were basically intact, and there were not many corpses on the ground. Obviously, for some reason, this main hall did not become the main battlefield of the civil war in Zhengxianmeng. Although the main hall of Kunlun was known as the residence of perfected Lord Tianlan, it was also one of the most important places in Fuyunji. Lu Chen looked around, hesitated for a moment, and then walked towards the main hall of Kunlun. At the same time, in the sky above his head, the shadow of the huge object was still approaching. Although it was not fast, it was still obvious that it was gradually getting closer. The air was filled with a strong smell of blood and fear that made one's heart beat faster. The door creaked open, and then Lu Chen saw the familiar main hall. Sure enough, there was a familiar figure sitting on the lotus throne that only belonged to him. Perfected Lord Tianlan sat on the high seat, his face ashen, and he was coughing non-stop. This was not normal, and Lu Chen felt it almost immediately. In the past, with perfected Lord Tianlan's cultivation and supernatural power, it was almost impossible for him to suffer from any illness. Now that he was like this, it was most likely because he had failed in the subtle and incomparably dangerous summoning method, and then suffered the power backfire. Cough, cough, cough. Perfected Lord Tianlan coughed violently. In the middle of it, he took a moment to catch his breath, and then raised his head to look at the door where Lu Chen was standing. Although there was a distance between them, Lu Chen could still see his face at a glance. His facial features were cracked, and blood was flowing. His immortal demeanor was long gone, and his face was faintly golden. Lu Chen gazed at him, and so did Supreme Tianlan, who was sitting on the lotus throne. After a while, Lu Chen walked into the hall with Atsu by his side. After crossing the threshold, Lu Chen casually closed the heavy door behind him. "There's no need." Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly spoke up. "Apart from the two of us, there's no one else alive on this mountain." Lu Chen was silent for a while, then said, "There are too many dead people. It's disgusting to look at." A trickle of blood flowed down from the side of perfected Lord Tianlan's ear. However, a smile appeared on his face. "You actually know how to be disgusting? I thought you have been in the devil sect for so many years, you have long been used to these things." Lu Chen walked slowly to the lotus throne and said, "There are too many dead people. It's not the same." Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to feel some pain in his chest. He covered his chest with his hand and coughed a few times. Then, he spat out some blood mixed with flesh. Panting, he smiled at Lu Chen and said, "Aren't they all dead people? What's the difference?" At this time, Lu Chen had already walked under the lotus throne. His voice sounded a little low. "Master, the sins you have committed today and the number of people you have killed is probably more than the number of people in the devil sect combined." Perfected Lord Tianlan's body swayed a little. Suddenly, he lost his footing and fell from the throne as if he could not support himself anymore. The fat and burly body tumbled in the air and a hint of confusion flashed across Lu Chen's eyes. Then, he suddenly took a step forward and reached out with both hands to catch perfected Lord Tianlan. Then, he helped perfected Lord Tianlan to sit on the ground. Perfected Lord Tianlan's breathing was disordered and his whole body was limp and weak. But at the moment of contact, Lu Chen already felt that his hands were cold, as if he had touched a dead person. "Is there no living person on this mountain, no in this city? Then, what will be the fate waiting for me and Tianlan?" He turned his head to look at the sky outside the hall and felt that it was getting dark. "Why did you do this?" Lu Chen sat down on the ground beside perfected Lord Tianlan and leaned against the cold lotus throne. Listening to the weakening breath of the person beside him, he asked in a low voice, "You are the number one person in the world. Given time, there may not be anyone who can challenge you. Why do you have to plot against these powerful enemies from outer space? Can't you just enjoy your wealth?" "Humph," perfected Lord Tianlan said with some disdain and pride, "I didn't do it for myself." Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, "Then why did you do it? Is it really for the people in the world that you told me before?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said nothing but smiled. Lu Chen sighed, and then he pointed out this damned Baldy's utterly unreasonable behavior and said, "But now it looks like all the living beings in the world are about to be killed because of you." "I did it for their own good," Perfected Lord Tianlon snorted and said. "The people in the world are all stupid. How can they know what is really good? That's why I came to make the decision for them. But now those things are too powerful. If the calculation goes wrong, the situation will be out of control. It can't be helped." Lu Chen shook his head and leaned his head against the throne, saying, "So you don't care about so many people's lives?" Perfected Lord Tianlon only said, "I didn't do anything wrong." Lu Chen looked at him for a while and said, "You're crazy. You're really crazy." Perfected Lord Tianlon's aura seemed to be getting weaker. However, he did not seem to be losing his focus. He looked at Lu Chen and suddenly smiled. "Where's the seed of the divine tree?" Lu Chen was shocked. Perfected Lord Tianlon said, "At that time, I had already succeeded in summoning the divine tree. However, the most crucial seed of the divine tree did not appear for a long time. That was why the formation stopped and was disrupted by those fools. However, I clearly felt that all 4 fragments were gathered. Now that I think about it, you were the only one around me at that time." He looked at Lu Chen and said softly, "I didn't expect that the 4th fragment, the seed of the divine tree, was actually with you." Lu Chen lowered his head and was silent for a moment before pointing at his chest gently. "It's already fused with my heart. If you want to take it out, you'll be killing me." Perfected Lord Tianlon was slightly surprised. Enlightened, he nodded. "I see." He seemed to be much more relaxed now that he knew the answer. He merely chuckled to himself in a self-deprecating manner. "Despite all my calculations, I've still missed out on so many things. It's inevitable that I'll die." His body tilted to the side, and then he put his hands behind his head and slowly lay down beside Lu Chen. He smiled and said, "What do you think the future generations will say about my life, and how do they see me as a person?" Lu Chen said in a low voice, "Do you think you're someone who cares about what others think?" Perfected Lord Tianlon burst into laughter and nodded with a smile. However, he glanced sideways at Lu Chen. "What about you? I don't care about the others, but you're different from them. I want to know what you think of me." Lu Chen took a deep breath of air and his body trembled slightly, as though he could sense that something was about to happen. He had experienced that soul-shattering feeling before and he felt it again today. He lowered his head. After a while he said, "You're a bastard. But no matter what, I'm still a lunatic that no one in the world can compare to." Perfected Lord Tianlon looked at him with a beaming face. His gaze started to lose focus and he muttered a few words that could not be heard clearly. He lowered his head. After a while, he suddenly sighed and closed his eyes. The hall fell silent and Lu Chen was the only one sitting there in silence. The world outside the hall was turning darker. Chapter 719. Lu Chen sat alone under the lotus throne for a long time. The hall was cold and quiet, and there was no sound at all. Only the black dog was still lying by his side loyally, accompanying Lu Chen through this cold and lonely time. After an unknown period of time, Lu Chen suddenly woke up from his deep thoughts. He suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. He lowered his head to take a look, and in his daze, he saw the inside of the seed of the tree of God. The ancient tree hole was now completely filled with the branches of the tree of God that came in from outside, and the 2 doors in the tree hole were now open. Darkness lingered outside the door, but the branches of the tree of God still could not find the entrance to this world. They kept slapping the tree wall, but found that it was so sturdy that it could not be destroyed. However, as the strength of the slapping increased, Lu Chen soon found that his heart was beginning to be unable to withstand such strength, and gradually felt like it was about to explode. Was this probably how he was going to die? Was he going to wait for death without even resisting, and was at his wit's end? Such a scene had appeared in Lu Chen's mind countless times, but when it really came, he still felt a little uneasy and terrified. However, he still managed to remain calm. There was a sudden movement on his feet. Lu Chen lowered his head to take a look, and it was Atsu, who was lying beside him. He did not know when it had approached him, but it was staring at him. Lu Chen smiled, and just as he was about to speak, he saw Atsu suddenly open its mouth, and then a small golden seal fell out of its mouth, rolled on his lower abdomen, and stopped. The Kunlun seal. Lu Chen was stunned for a moment, obviously not expecting this at all. Then, although the atmosphere was very tense at the moment, he could not help but laugh. He shook his head, touched Atsu's head, and said with a smile, "You're really something, Atsu. I really forgot about this thing just now." He gently picked up the small golden seal, and the golden light from the Kunlun seal reflected gently in his eyes. After a while, Lu Chen seemed to think of something and made a decision. He took a deep breath, put down the Kunlun seal, and hugged Atsu to his side. "Do me a favor, Atsu," he said softly. Atsu looked up at him without saying anything, but it wagged its tail. There was a moment of confusion in Lu Chen's eyes, and he looked at an unknown place in the distance. After a while he put his head on Atsu's forehead, and then whispered, "Take this Kunlun seal back to Kunlun Mountain, and give it to Su Qingjun." Atsu's tail instantly stopped moving. The black dog seemed to want to struggle, as if it wanted to open its mouth and express something, but its body was firmly held by Lu Chen. He did not intend to let go at all, and just held it tightly in his arms. "Help me once," Lu Chen said quietly in a low voice. "After you awakened, you are smarter than most people in the world. You should be able to see that here He pointed to his chest, then shook his head and said, "There is no other way." Atsu quieted down, no longer barking, and no longer struggled. It just stared at Lu Chen with a pair of dog eyes, and there seemed to be a trace of sadness in its eyes. "It is enough to have you accompany me until the end," Lu Chen smiled and said. "It is not a lonely death. Very good, I am very satisfied." He waved his hand, and then gently pushed Atsu away. Atsu looked at him for a long time, and seeing that Lu Chen had no intention of changing his mind, it finally lowered its head in silence, put the Kunlun seal back in its mouth, and then turned around and ran out of the hall. It ran all the way away, faster and faster, until it disappeared. A smile appeared at the corner of Lu Chen's mouth, and he waved in the direction of Atsu's departure. But halfway through, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, and his whole body suddenly tilted, and he almost fell to the ground. It was also at this moment that he accidentally bumped into perfected Lord Tianlan next to him. That damn Baldy moved a little, and then there was no more reaction, and he still lay quietly on the ground. Lu Chen panted, and with great difficulty, he endured the sharp pain in his heart. Looking at perfected Lord Tianlan's face, he suddenly smiled and said, "Many years ago, it was you who gave me a life, and then you gave me the name, Tian Ying. Now, it is probably time for me to return all these things to you." He pursed his lips regretfully, patted perfected Lord Tianlan's shoulder, and said with a smile, "Speaking of which, in our lineage of Taoist names with the character Tian, I am probably the weakest one since ancient times. My cultivation is low, and I achieve nothing. If I die later, I will probably be laughed at by the ancestors of the past generations in the netherworld. Yes, even though you're a lunatic, even though the things you've done are inexplicable and stupid, I still have to call you master. So, just let my lineage end here. Otherwise, you will always want to do something earth-shattering, and every time you do it, you will drag everyone in the world to die with you." Lu Chen chuckled. Just as he was about to force himself to stand up, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind when his gaze swept across perfected Lord Tianlan's face. In that instant, he seemed to have grasped something. Something that he had been neglecting all this while. Why did perfected Lord Tianlan gather so many monsters together, and even summon the divine tree? Yes, he, who had planned everything in the human world, lost control when he encountered these powerful enemies from beyond the heavens, because the enemies were too powerful. This was how lunatics were. If an accident happened, they would lose everything. But what was his original purpose? Did he want to save the world? Although his idea was laughable, and it seemed more like he was dragging all living beings in the world to hell with him, Lu Chen understood this lunatic the best. He must have some kind of goal for him to do this. Perfected Lord Tianlan must have a way to destroy all these monsters in the end, and let this world be reborn. That was his ultimate purpose. What exactly was it? What did he want to do before he died? Lu Chen's mind began to spin crazily. At this moment, he did not even care about the pain in his heart. At a certain moment, he suddenly thought of something. Although he did not have much confidence, but wasn't he going to die anyway? Lu Chen stood up and staggered out of the main hall of Kunlun. As soon as he walked out of the door, Lu Chen saw that the entire sky had turned dark. A figure that looked even bigger than the Sky Dragon mountain range was slowly descending from the sky. Chapter 720. That thing was so huge that Lu Chen couldn't even see it clearly, but he knew what it was. A strong wind blew from afar. Lu Chen looked up at the sky and suddenly smiled. If someone saw this smile, they would definitely say that it was very similar to the smile that true Lord Tianlan had in the underground cave not long ago. He covered his chest with one hand and closed his eyes. Suddenly, he let out a soft shout. A moment later, the world spun, and before he could open his eyes, he felt a sharp pain all over his body, as if there were countless sharp blades stabbing into his body at the same time, cutting him into 1,000 pieces. Even someone as persevering as Lu Chen couldn't help but cry out in pain at this moment. When he opened his eyes once more, he noticed that he'd returned to the ancient tree hole, and his body had shockingly been entangled by countless branches of the divine tree. The innumerable leaves and branches were like sharp blades that pierced through his body, causing him to be riddled with holes while blood sprayed out. A branch rose in front of Lu Chen like a poisonous snake, looking like it was going to stab into his head in the next moment. As the pain surged like a tide, Lu Chen roared, "I can take you out." The branch pierced his forehead and stopped abruptly. This ancient tree hole was originally filled with all kinds of strange sounds, but now it was suddenly silent. After a while, the branch slowly retreated, and the branches and leaves that were more terrifying than the blades were also slowly pulled out from his body. Blood gushed out wildly. Lu Chen curled up in pain, but at the same time, the surrounding branches of the divine tree suddenly spewed out green vital essence, surrounding Lu Chen. The wounds healed and regenerated at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was as if nothing had happened. The branches and vines slowly dropped down and placed Lu Chen on the ground. Lu Chen turned around and looked around. He looked at the unrecognizable ancient tree hole that had been completely occupied by the branches of the divine tree. He smiled with a hint of desolation and gentleness. Then he nodded and said, "Hold on tight, let's go out. Go to that world." The world spun and the stars filled the sky again. However, this time, it was still somewhat different from before. When Lu Chen opened his eyes again, he was once again standing on solid ground in front of the majestic Kunlun Hall. The only difference was that he was holding a branch tightly in his hand. That was the branch of the divine tree. It was tightly wrapped around his arm and had come to this world with him. And this was only the beginning. Lu Chen's gaze followed the branch, from his fingers to his wrist, to his arm, and even higher. The branch was tightly attached to his arm, and its root was sticking out from Lu Chen's chest. This branch seemed to grow on his heart. The branch of the divine tree slowly curled up and swayed, as if it was sensing this brand new world. Then it began to slowly grow, extend, and stretch forward. Behind it, or more accurately, in Lu Chen's heart, a passage had already completely formed. More and more branches extended out from his heart, but strangely, Lu Chen did not suffer any damage. He did not even feel any pain. He lowered his head and saw that his heart had turned into an extremely strange passageway. It had become the entrance for the Tree of God to connect to this world. More and more branches rapidly passed through and entered this place. Then, the branches of the Tree of God looked up at the same time, almost at the same time. There was a huge figure descending over there. In the darkness, there seemed to be a wild howl. The speed of the divine tree's growth suddenly increased by 10 times. Countless branches frantically climbed up into the sky, and in the process, they kept expanding, turning into huge arms that could tear apart space-time and even destroy everything. The giant in the sky seemed to have sensed something and suddenly let out a loud roar. Its body twisted a little as if it wanted to react, but the branches of the divine tree had already swarmed over from all directions. They coiled around the giant like countless venomous snakes, wrapping around every part of the giant with all their might. Looking at the terrifying branches of the divine tree fluttering in the sky, the divine tree, which seemed to be even larger than the sky, had a thin root, and that was where Lu Chen's heart was. All the branches of the divine tree came from this passage. Even though they could destroy this part of the world, they still seemed to be helpless against this passage and could only rely on it. Lu Chen lowered his head to look at his heart. The giant who had raised his head to look at him realized that the owner of the huge eye, who had once been insufferably arrogant, was unable to resist the divine tree's despotic power. He did not even have the chance to escape. He could only cry out in agony as he was trapped and devoured by the divine tree. For some reason, a thought echoed in Lu Chen's heart. Perhaps it was because of the arrival of the huge eye that he had fallen into such a predicament and fallen into such a hopeless situation. However, this was not the time to think about these things. He lowered his head to look at his heart, and after a while he said in a low voice, "These people with the Heavenly Tao name are all messing around. In the end, the most useless one is Heaven's shadow. I'll just make up for this world a little." He smiled. It was unknown what he had thought of, but he seemed to find it interesting. It was also as if he had suddenly regained the calmness and confidence he had in the past. Perhaps, if one was not afraid of death, they would not be afraid of anything. Lu Chen used his hand to cut open his chest. His flesh and blood split open, and even his bones were no exception. Blood flowed out, and then he saw his own heart hidden in his chest. He did not know what kind of power had supported Lu Chen to not faint until now. Perhaps it was the abundant life essence of the divine tree. His expression was abnormally calm. He used his finger to cut open the atrium of his heart. That place was not difficult to find at all, as countless branches of the divine tree grew from there. After cutting open the atrium of his heart, he saw the seed. It had already fused with his heart. Countless branches of the divine tree extended out from this seed. The giant in the sky no longer made a sound. In front of a terrifying existence like the divine tree, which was the source of life, even a giant like this was no match for it. Not long after, the world suddenly rumbled. The giant's body seemed to have been sucked dry. It broke into countless pieces and fell from the sky. "It's time." Lu Chen narrowed his eyes slightly, and then he said softly, "Even if I die, I'll probably die in this way." He reached out and grabbed his heart. At the same time, his entire body began to tremble. In the sky, those terrifying branches of the divine tree suddenly paused, as if they had sensed something. They all turned around in unison. Lu Chen grabbed his heart with one hand and the seed with the other. He raised his head and looked at the branches that were flying and falling rapidly in the sky. Suddenly, he laughed out loud. A dark flame flashed on his hand and burned wildly. The seed trembled, but it didn't seem to have any signs of cracking. However, the tentacles that were exposed were unable to withstand the attack of the dark flame and were charred and withered black. Although the seed was desperately trying to connect with Lu Chen's heart, Lu Chen suddenly gritted his teeth. The dark flames instantly burned brightly, and then he pulled hard. With a sizzling sound, the seed was finally pulled out of his heart. At the same time, there was a sudden explosion inside his heart, as if something had exploded. In the void, there seemed to be an extremely angry roar. Lu Chen did not care. He only cared about what was in front of him. After losing the connection with his heart, the seed suddenly began to wither. At this moment, the invisible passage that was connected by countless branches of the divine tree also closed at this moment. All the branches of the divine tree in the sky lost their support at the same time. Without the support of their origin, they suddenly lost all their vitality. They turned into decay and fell from the sky. With a clatter, the seed fell to the ground. Next to it was Lu Chen, who was holding his own heart. He slowly sat on the ground, lay down, and stared at the sky. In the sky, everything finally disappeared. A cool breeze blew from afar, blowing away the haze that covered the sky, and revealed the clear blue sky again. Lu Chen struggled to put his heart back into his chest, but it was useless. His heart had been shattered, and it could never be restored to its original state. He fell down and looked at the beautiful sky. Before he lost consciousness, he said softly, "I wonder if I can live without a heart? Without a heart, I can probably live." Under this sky, the last dark haze belonged to the underground cavern ruins. But at this moment, everything had long been destroyed, and only darkness remained. But from the depths of the darkness, a figure walked out. It was a young girl. It was White Lotus. Her skin was sparkling and translucent, and it was as if she had become a completely different person. What was even stranger was that there was a demonic ghost the size of an eagle perched on her shoulder. It was roaring at Lu Chen, who was lying on the ground in front of it, and it looked like it really wanted to go over and have a good meal. White Lotus stopped it, smiled, and walked to Lu Chen's side and sat down. She looked at this man, her eyes somewhat complicated. Then she lowered her voice and said softly, "Without a heart, you can also live. You are like me. Forget everything in the past, and you can live well." She smiled, and suddenly reached out to grab the demon beast. She needed it a few times, and in the blink of an eye, this demon beast had turned into a black ball the size of a heart. Then, she carefully placed this black ball into Lu Chen's chest. After a moment, dozens of black tentacles stretched out from the black ball, and all the blood vessels in Lu Chen's body were reconnected. Lu Chen's body shook violently, as if he felt pain in his sleep, but he did not open his eyes, as if he could not wake up. White Lotus gently touched this man's face and said softly, "You have to live well. In the future, when the door of darkness reopens, you will still be the last passage." She smiled, then stood up and turned around. She walked all the way back to the underground cavern, and walked into the door of darkness. A rumbling sound rang out, and the door of darkness slowly closed. Everything seemed to be reborn. Sunlight shone down, and after an unknown period of time, a man on the ground slowly opened his eyes, looked at the sky and then frowned. "Who am I?" "Heaven's shadow. I remember now. Is everything over?" Lu Chen slowly sat up. He felt a slight pain in his head, and the pain in his chest was even more intense, but there were indeed some things that he could not remember. But it did not matter, there was still a long time in the future, enough for him to slowly think. Now, he wanted to find a person. He had really had enough of this life of loneliness. He wanted to go ask her if she was willing to live together. And hiding on that cliff was fine too. He laughed loudly, feeling inexplicably happy. Then, he took a step forward, and walked into the distance. Behind him, in the mysterious underground cavern world, the door of darkness at this moment completely closed, and then with a whoosh, suddenly disappeared from this world, never to be seen again. End of the book. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.